Uh, is that yours, Kevin?
So I just started recording. So this is Content Evolution New World, and I'm East Coast. Mike McGuire's West Coast, and we're delighted to have you with us. And we have Reading AI meeting with us. I invited a gentleman who,
Ah,
you know, Doug from GoPoint, who helped Vivaldi Partners with a project, and he was a good
I
guy.
see.
So he's on the West Coast. So I think he has sent his bot, and since I know who sent it, I'm okay.
Previously, those previous attempts from somebody else, Doug at least has a disclaimer and a notification. So well done,
Yeah,
Doug.
yeah. We're delighted to have Tim Beheron with us. And my I saw an accept from Kevin Jones. We'll see whether Kevin gets in here. But ready for our topic, or anything you want to clear out before we talk about tangible returns?
No, I'm waiting. I think we're all.
Okay.
I did a short post on Substack. We're following up on
Okay.
the Vision Pro.
Okay. So that's good. So tangible returns, short thesis is, and maybe hypothesis, but I think that it qualifies as thesis because there's evidence to support it, is that businesses regularly tell us that they want tangible returns, right? Show me the tangibility in the action that we're going to take, or the new product, service, experience that we're going to launch. And at the end of the day, if you peel that back and say, so what does that mean? How are you going to measure
Right.
that? It kind of gets back to, we'd like to see increased revenue and profit. I mean, the motivations for, why do you do something kind of goes back to, can I put that on the spreadsheet over in the CFO's office and report, to the C-suite that, the business is, doing better than it was, last time we
Yeah,
talked.
but Kevin, one other matrix I see a lot is
Mhm.
uh how much will it save me?
I could not, because what that does is, the jujitsu there is,
Right.
it lowers the balance point, because you know your profit comes from exceeding you know your costs. So if you can lower your costs, your balance point, you achieve it earlier, right, in whatever you're doing.
Mhm.
The assertion that I made, in the business metaphysics here, is that by denominating it in currency or money, that this is the most intangible thing that human beings have ever invented, right? It's, it's pretty ethereal, right? In terms of what is fiat currency, issued by governments, or crypto issued by crypto bros. Was it worth? It's worth whatever you believe it's worth, right? Whatever the foundational belief. When we see that belief erodes, you can see what happens, right? Is it collapses pretty fast. And so this is a paradox, right? That's the way that we're measuring, tangible results. And I think that if you think about marketing, and, well, why are you using the toothpaste or the deodorant or the whatever? The first order benefit is, being a presentable human being, right? As you ladder back up, it's, I want to be more attractive to other humans, right? And it used to be I want to go get the girl, right, as it were. So the point is, second, third order benefits. We need to think about that, because I believe, and I'll finish the hypothesis here, is that it's greater permission to operate, greater freedom, greater capacity to do things that you want to do as an organization, is that's actually a tangible result. And summoning all the resources that you have, money, human, ideas, otherwise, so that you pursue that greater capacity and be able to, do more. And the organization that you've been tracking for decades, Tim, Apple is a great example of an organization that I think that truly understands resources in this broader context, right? And these capacities in a greater context. And there are other organizations. I mean, clearly, I experienced that at IBM. But there were times when the call of the quarter was, difficult, versus, the instincts to, be more widely available to do, large, capacity projects on the planet. The bigger the problem was, the better IBM liked it, right? So, grand challenges were, still, I think that's still kind of the clarion call for why the organization exists. So I've unpacked the hypothesis. Let's talk about it.
So let me tell you one example from the VR side.
Sure.
We have been doing a lot of work with especially one major insurance company, where the question was, how much money could we save using VR in training?
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting because when we looked at the historical data of how companies like Gucci and Walmart and guys that have already used it, you could see tangible examples of everything from training a person, from taking the training of a person 8 weeks down to 2 weeks, things like, in fact, in Walmart's case, it was really interesting because the Walmart people who used the headsets for the training didn't want to give them up. They literally enjoyed the experience so much, and they wanted, give us more stuff.
Right.
But in the end, you could quantify that, because instead of 8 weeks, you're down to 2 weeks, and then you had a dollar value. In this case, they saved, I believe the rough estimate was between 60 to 80% of training costs in Walmart alone. And I have on my Metaverse Resource Center site, I have dozens of examples of that. But that's a good, the issue of the tangible results really comes from the value proposition at the beginning, and then finding ways to actually, as you pointed out, Kevin, because this is the big thing, is what the actual savings or revenue impact it's going to have.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not they don't go into that research side without having a particular goal that says, if we do this, what will happen?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always about the money.
Yeah. The KPIs, as you go up, say, the Pine and Gilmore experience economy model, that you're going from interchangeable, fungible goods. I can look up gold and pork bellies and that kind of stuff in the newspaper, or if I got a Bloomberg, I can look at that minute to minute, what's it trading for? That gets reorganized into products, into services, into experiences, into transformations. And as you move up that stack, you get to charge more, right? Because you're adding more value, right, to it. And in the world that you're describing, a lot of the stuff that is VR related, it's experiential. And to the degree that you're using it, in some ways, it can be transformational, right? Which means that you're up in the higher end of the value stack, not in terms of the initial cost of the device, but the use case for it. And if you're doing simulation, we know that for certain tasks like flying an airplane or running a nuclear submarine or mission critical tasks that have a specific way of doing it the right way, that simulation learning beats everything else hands down, right? It's the best modality, right, for getting somebody to practice in a safe environment. I mean, you can't crash the airplane when you're really in the airplane, but you can in a simulation. So
Sure.
um, those are all, those are benefits of, running scenarios, doing things that you can't do. If you're a student, an engineering student, and you want to know how a jet aircraft, engine runs, you can't get inside the thing when it's running, but you can in a simulation,
Yeah.
right? And so they're great, great use cases.
I have another interesting example of that coming from the medical side. We just did our recent podcast was focused on the medical use of VR and AI specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And we highlighted a doctor out of, I want to say Pasadena, one of the most advanced brain surgeons. And he showed what he did in a particular case of doing a bit of brain surgery to take certain things out of what would have been an obstruction of some type. It wasn't cancerous, but they had to go in to take this out. And he was saying that, for generations, we would approach the surgery relatively blindly. We would have the original, what do you call it, the X-rays, so we could see what we needed to do. But sometimes we had to guess on things like, should we go through the front of the head, or should we go through the side, or what is the easiest way? And using VR simulation, he was able to do the actual virtual surgery and used it to literally find out the right position to actually go into the head. And his comment was just great. He says, it's much better for me to experiment and do this before I do the operation, lest I be probing you to figure that out.
Exactly. And the refurb depot, I mean, the mothership is out where you guys are, right? Out
Yeah.
on the West Coast in Silicon Valley for Da Vinci, right? The robot that does surgery. The refurb facility is here in Research Triangle Park, right?
Yeah.
So I've been inside the refurb and upgrade, for the Da Vinci's that are coming in, and they get them ready for their next use case. They update the software and put on the new widgets. It's amazing what that machine can do. But you're absolutely right that practicing on the patient and mapping out the procedure virtually is far superior, right, to doing it real time, right, which is what every surgeon had to do
Right.
prior to having the inspection modalities, right, like X-rays and ultrasounds and all that other kind of good stuff. They would just cut you open and see what they could do.
Yeah.
Right.
He
And they
made
were,
one
and they had to wash their hands too. That
Yeah.
was the biggest advancement in human medicine, was,
Sure.
not transferring germs from one patient to another.
He made one other point that really struck us, because this is another thing about VR I think that is going to be very important in medical. He said that once he figured out what to do and the right way to do it, he then brought the patient in and showed them exactly what he was going to do. And he
Right.
said that at that point, it changed the comfort level of the patient, because the patient now, instead of thinking, having you verbally describe what we're going to do, you're now visually, so they actually have a contextual idea of what's going to happen. And because the doctor's showing them, here's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to drill here, I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to, etc. And he said that, like in 80, something like, I think he said 80% of the patients we use this and show them in advance, their fear level drops dramatically, and they go into the surgery. And he says, while you may not be able to quantify that, you can absolutely lower the family's pressure, the individual's psyche, etc. And they go into it, in a more relaxed all right, let's just do it. Let's
Yeah,
get it.
one of the measures might be that you could talk to the anesthesiologist and say the person goes under with less medication as a
Uh-huh.
result of that anxiety level being tamped down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't
My
know.
only point is that when I look at in this particular work we're doing with the big insurance company, what we're having to prove to them is exactly that. What are the tangible results?
Right.
Mhm.
And ultimately, it's how in the first project has to do with VR training, but another one is like we're going to do an expo for selling insurance to the brokers, etc. But in each one of them, it really came down to um, impact, cost savings, and then impact. I
So
mean, and
okay,
then
go ahead, Mike.
delivery.
I'm got an example from General Electric here in a second, but Mike, come on in.
Well, no, thank you. And it was, as you were speaking, Tim, it sparked a memory, particularly about when you're talking about the medical imaging, and that the application of some of these advanced technologies there. It's I think one of the challenges I think a lot of business people have with this notion of kind of getting beyond, software we all understand, right? But that's now I think accounted development, R&D, et cetera, for software and intangible is now covered by like most of the national accounting boards, right? Because that's always the issue with business is how do I account for this investment or this money or this time or this effort? But it was interesting. I think what people worry, no, not worries. I think one of the concerns is I may invest in this or in some of these things about measuring and understanding better intangibles. What are they trying to avoid, right? And it's kind of the point of your original post, Kevin, the paradox. I did not realize this till I was reading one of these books around intangibles. It's the Capitalism Without Capital. Kevin, I
I've
don't know.
got that book. That's a good book.
Did you know that story about the CAT scan?
Yeah,
Where that originally got funded?
yeah, I did.
Tim, it was, and listeners, it was EMI, the record company. Um, they did so well with the Beatles and Beatlemania. They were calculating that at one time in 65 or 66, they were making something like the
Mhm.
equivalent of $650 a minute. Um, and, EMI's got to invest that in something. And they had a big tech R&D department, but one of the guys working in there actually developed what became the CAT scan technology. He won a Nobel Prize and a knighthood. EMI didn't make that much money off of that. They made some licensing money to Siemens, but I
But
think here we talk about it. And I think one of the things I was getting at, Kevin, is how do we get this? Nobody can argue the benefit of the development of the CAT scan. The fact that it was a record label is kind of amusing. But is there in some form, these kind of accounting bodies and businesses, do we need,
well,
I'm going to say
accounting.
altruism and it's not the right word, right? But
I,
as you develop that, is there a benefit one sees that isn't just revenue or on licensing fees?
so I have had an ongoing conversation, cum argument with the Financial Accounting Standards Board for a long time about intangibles, right? And it has, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole,
Yeah,
but the fact, because it's kind of like they think that's the dark arts, okay? Accounting for intangibles. However, accounting, the way that we understand it today, and the way the economy has evolved, it's broken, right? Is the notional idea of being able to account for what you were growing in an agrarian society and then be able to count the stuff that was coming off the assembly line during our manufacturing, it continued to work, pretty well. But the minute that we went over into delivering value over the internet, all right, with code, all right, with a number of other things that are clearly ineffable, and the next copy, it doesn't cost anything to make another copy of it, is that breaks accounting, all right, and we continue to use the substrate and the metaphysics of how accounting works,
right.
because it's the best that we have, but it needs to advance, right? Because it's not doing a good job. Let me give you the GE example I was about to talk about, which is General Electric aircraft engines decided strategically that the reason that they exist is to deliver reliable thrust. And it didn't have anything to do with physically making an aircraft engine. It had to do with keeping the, bolting something onto the airframe that would keep the airplane up in the air safely, reliably, right? That value proposition, which you were talking about before, Tim, allowed them to do a head-to-head comparison with, go look at Rolls-Royce, go look at somebody else, right, that can offer you the same thing. Their statistics don't look like ours. If you choose GE aircraft engines and use our financing, okay, so that's a different way to change cost, and take this to your insurer, your insurance cost for that airplane will go down, because we can demonstrate that we're going to keep it up in the air more safely than if you put a competitor's engine on. That was a pretty interesting, compelling, value proposition, right? Is that the tangible number of what does the engine cost? No, you're over into the secondary, operational costs, all right, of doing it. And why is the insurance company doing it? Because they don't want to face one of those class action suits because the whole aircraft crashed someplace and every passenger is suing that airline and that manufacturer. Those are the ones that come up with billion-dollar outcomes, from court suits, and go on for 20 years, right? They would prefer to never see those. So
Right.
that's a story, right, that gets you to second and third order benefits.
You were going to mention another example that you had.
Me?
I thought you
Or
said
Mike?
No, you, Kevin. I thought you said you had.
That was the GE example that I did want to deliver.
Okay.
And from my point of view, there are there are clearly other things that are going on. Let me give you a different example of a benefit. Societally, we, because I'm working on it right now. Societally, we have a whole class of people who have come to the conclusion that vaccinations are harmful, right? And therefore, I'm not going to get vaccinated. I'm not going to let my kids get vaccinated. We have evidence to support now through veterinarians that some people have chosen to not vaccinate their animals. All right. So there are downstream consequences of not doing this in terms of public health. Mm-hmm. We've worked with a number of different states, a number of different, organizations, NIH, CDC, lightly had conversations. My Richard Carson, who's the chief scientist for Choice Flows, is very well connected in these worlds. In any event, we said, all right, you know what? The was it Commerce? No, it was Food and Drug Administration had a task force, and they took some foods that were not well thought of and renamed them. One of them was the Patagonian toothfish, right? And it became Chilean sea bass.
Sea bass.
Right? And Chilean sea bass is very popular. In fact, it's overfished now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it is really tasty.
It's good.
It is. It's good. It's a nice white flaky fish, but they couldn't sell Patagonian toothfish to save their souls. All right. So because it was a bad name. All right. Anybody want a prune? No, I don't want a prune. Would you like a dried apricot? Oh, okay. All right. So fact is, we've come to the conclusion that, and doing research, that we need to rebrand vaccinations. All right. Would you like an immunoboost, or something along those lines, would potentially allow you to have a different conversation with people that are dead set against the word vaccination, because you're going to come into that conversation offering the same benefits with a different name. All right. And they probably want the benefits if they can be described, right? But you have to take the, the problem, of being part of our group and needing to say, oh, I hate vaccinations, to be part of, the clan of people that I'm part of. This is part of acceptance. We need to be able to bypass that. So it's a hypothesis that we're currently exploring and trying to do the research to understand, can we get there? What's this, third order benefit? Third order benefit is that we have a healthier,
Sure.
population. Population health, gets, back to where it should be, before we, started to think that, taking, a flu shot was going to cause autism or something, right? So, with that said, that's another example.
But I think I think that's why, one of the things I mentioned, before we did this call the other day, is as we look to get this embrace, and I think that's an interesting one, the vaccinations. I think, how do we, I think my first question is, well, how do you guard or build into the fact that, and eventually somebody figures out the rhetorical sleight of hand, right? It's like, oh, they're rebranding it something else. And I think that's always something I wonder, but I think that's part of the reason when I was talking about our kind of setup to this call, how many decades do we have, right, of business leaders, and those of us who weren't, quote, leaders, but were working in business, shy away, or how do we move away from or minimize, Friedman's point of view, right? Or the dictum, right? Which is the corporation's first job is primary responsibility is shareholder value. Do we get, because we're seeing things like ESG kind of not fall by the wayside, but getting muted, and we've had investors, a lot of their backlash because people were investing based on those notions. That's a starting point to me, and it's going to take a while. Likewise, is this where you see this notion of intangibles kind of going, that this is going to be a long education process, because we're going to have to undo a lot of decades, right, of people being instructed and told the corporation's first job responsibility is to maintain and increase shareholder value.
And to some degree, the people who are, leaders in that field, the Philip Kotlers from a marketing point of view, the strategy people, they have all started to kind of renounce the Milton Friedman only point of view of, the only thing we have to take care of are our shareholders, right? The owners, because they've started to take this more end-to-end value chain view and said, what are actually the supports that give us the permissions to operate, right? And, if I go and say, well, customers, that's the most important thing. Fine, right? Can we serve customers if we are abusive to our employees, right? How do they then behave relative to the customers? Oh, wow, we need more alignment there, all right? Okay, so let's abuse the suppliers, okay? They can be, the place where we, extract a pound of flesh. Oh, right. Guess what? If we're not paying attention to them, you end up with Takata airbags, all right, being deployed across the entire Japanese car line, all right, and creating problems, distrust, lawsuits, right? Because they weren't doing lean, Kanban, right? All the things that Toyota, Mazda, Nissan were doing, right? They were doing something else, right? And, lowest cost, supplier. Oh, maybe we need to bring them into the conversation and treat them well, all right? And, get them to, oh, this whole thing's connected. It's a system. Oops, maybe I ought to be thinking about stakeholders as opposed to just, shareholders who, again, are getting, the compressed flat land of, just the revenue and earnings, right? If you're not doing this the right way, the fitness landscape is changing so that you may not be able to exist, right? And so all of those, only the shareholder folks have started to realize, right, that there's a lot of other forces. I would recommend, if you have not laid your hands on the External Control of Organizations by Pfeffer and Solancic, you got to take a look at it. It's an old chestnut. It's hard to buy unless it got reprinted recently. But it lays out all this stuff in a pretty compelling way. And it was written 35 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. I don't know about Solancic, but Pfeffer's still alive, right? So there you go. Hey, Mike, you said that you had some updates on Vision Pro. I'm sure that Tim has some.
I think Tim has
so.
more experience, definitely more experience than I do in that. It was just noting, that it went, the pre-orders went out, and I guess February 2nd, they start showing up in the stores. And it was simply noting that. And, as I noted, I think we talked about with Tim, and I'd like to hear more, is, there are going to be a few individuals who just, because they want to and they can, and it's important to them, they'll pay the $3,500. But it seems to me it's a lot of, will be the tier of developers who didn't get into the early invite program will be snatching a lot of those up. But I was curious, Tim, I don't know if you noticed, I think the follow-up, Kevin, was noting that, Netflix was not going to make its app available on Vision Pro immediately. And, it was the note, the tone of the article, which I think it was in Ars Technica, was, geez, that's certainly going to dim the appeal of this product, which seemed to me to kind of miss the forest for the tree, so to speak.
There's a lot of, first of all, when you actually use it, the web browser is actually, in theory, a killer app, because even though it doesn't do the 3D, it adds an immense amount of theater experience to looking at a Netflix video. But going back to your, the people who've bought it, there's another category that has popped up that is making it harder to determine the real demand for it, and that's scalpers. You
alluded to that in our last call.
Yeah, there was a report of one particular guy using bots to buy 152 units. Technically, Apple has set it up that you could only buy 2, and you have to do it by face recognition. So I'm not sure how he was able to do that. And again, that was not documented, but that was listed as one who tracks this. Said that someone bought 152 out of the door. Regardless, you're right, Mike. In theory, it's the early adopters. There's probably thousands of Mac developers, especially, who needed to get their hands on it to actually do program testing.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll tell you,
and it was a physical world limitation, right? Tim's like, Apple just didn't have enough spaces and physical spaces to put those developers with, and probably limited number of devices.
Although, to be fair, they did show over 1,000 developers, and this was an amazing accomplishment. But during the 5 days of the developer conference in June, they cycled through over 1,000 developers to see this in person. And there's no question from Apple's standpoint that this is not a easy product to work with without being able to have one, right, and develop around it. The one big thing, and I'll just put some context to this, and it's a very important part of whether this succeeds or not, but it's the software that's going to make this successful. The hardware is actually the platform. But my point is that they already have 10,000 ARKit apps that work with this.
Mm-hmm.
So out of the
Yep.
box, they weren't a Google just throwing glasses out and just see where it would stick. Apple actually had 7 full years of ARKit development, and every one of those could work on the VR headset out the door. Now, the reason that the Netflix and I forgot who the other one was said they weren't going to do it had more to do with a timing issue.
Right.
It's one of those, basic idea of if there's tens of thousands or even a million that are out there, then it's in our best interest. And you can bet they are doing development. They're not releasing it, but they're doing development. And it's still very early in the uh, in the sense of whether it'll be successful or not. But Apple has done everything right in the sense that they've got the stores lined up. They had the ARKit
Yeah.
software developers already in.
Oh no, everything was in place. I was cynical at first when it was announced, right? Because I was like, no, make Siri better first. Give me a real agent software, then give me the headset. And that's as with all things Apple, it's not either or, right? It's always sure, and we can also do something else. But I think the fascinating part to me is with the Netflix thing is cynically I was thinking, well, Netflix is going to say they're trying to preserve the family unit, by not having everybody ensconced in their little helmets. But I think you're right. I mean, I think what that person missed in Netflix, they were pointing out that was going to be a real chill is there. And if you take my cynical point of view to any degree, we forget how many people live in small apartments, right? And in multiple member things. So cutting yourself off from your roommates isn't going to be as objectionable. In fact, we all know those roommates will be clamoring to get a chance to use it before they get theirs. And I
By the
think,
way,
the transition to glasses, I think will be interesting, but knowing Apple, they'll probably be, at some point 4 or 5 different things that give us a way to access those experiences without the goggles per se.
there's a very interesting adjacent technology that was just recently shown in demonstration form from the Disney Imagineers. All right. And what it is, it's a virtual floor. All right. And so if you're wearing any of this stuff, one of the things that you hear about is that, if you don't have the perceptual capability of seeing, the coffee table or the wall or whatever, you let people run into stuff, right? Well, when you have the virtual floor down, you can walk in any direction infinitely, turn around, change direction, and you actually never move, right? Physically, right? It's just that, it adapts to what you're doing. And it's a great companion piece of tech, right? To go with what's happening here, because that, ability to physically feel like you're moving through the forest or taking a long walk, but actually not moving at all, right? In XY is wonderful. It's really cool. So if you can look it up, right? There's some guy that is an Imagineer that just got, status that was only given to Walt Disney himself, right, prior to this time, is the second recipient of this level of invention, right, in Disney. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, to be honest with you, we're kind of in one of the more what I could call transitionary period
Yep.
of personal computing.
Mm.
Doing a lot of contemplating and research on this because of the impact. Um, but when you think about the computing experience, which is now almost 55 years old, um, everything has been 2D, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet our world is in
Mhm.
3D. So capturing the digital world and transitioning from 2D to 3D is a long process. If it took us 50 years just to flush out a 2D computing experience,
Right.
that's not going to happen overnight. Um, Someone asked me recently, what year I thought we'd know if Apple's going to be really successful. And I'm using kind of a metaphor that's kind of a joke in the industry, but it's always the third version that seems to get it right, right? Whether it be Windows
Yeah.
or, I mean, we just see that you start somewhere and then you evolve the product. And in this case, you have to have other things come in place, not only the technology available, the manufacturing capability, and the software, right? And one of the things that I was at CES, while a lot of people want to go and look at the shiny toys, I look at the stuff that makes the shiny toys. So I specifically went and took meetings on optical waveguides and new
Right.
technologies regarding, lenses and glasses and etc. And every one of them told me that we're still 2 to 3 years out to getting the kind of optical and waveguides necessary even to do the glasses.
What about audio? Were you also looking at audio? Because that to me is always the other key element, right?
Yeah, but the
Is in
audio
these.
is much farther along, and it's not facing the same kind of
Agreed. Did you know Tom Paddock? Did I ever introduce you to him, or
so
an audio guy? He did a lot of work with Intel's audio
I have
tools.
because I dealt with Intel's
Yeah.
audio guys a lot.
Yeah, he was a lot working on the, down on the metal with the chips with Intel, and I can't remember the other chip company he was doing a lot of work with. And it's, yet I think to your point, that was I agree with you, and I think that the audios, and actually we think about these goggles, right? Guys like Paddock came out of, that San Jose State aeronautics engineering department there that's really good. And that, to your point, I mean, they've been working on you know fighter pilot helmets and audio systems for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because that's, as you know well though, Tim, that connection between the visual and the audio systems is so subtle but so important. I think, and Apple's obviously invested quite a bit in audio, including, whatever IP they got from Beats. But I think that's going to be the other one I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah, I just think we're as I said, we're 50 years in 2D. We're going to now shift to 3D, and it's going to be another multi-year journey. And if you use that same metaphor, remember what the first IBM PC looked like, or what the first Apple I and Apple II looked like. Our PCs today don't look like anything that was at that point. So I can imagine, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, we're talking about new form factors, new designs, but this whole shift from 2D to 3D, it's starting over again, and that's exciting from us and who live the 50 years or 40 years plus of 2D. We're at least going to see the early success of the transition to 3D.
Yeah. Well, this is you can have it in any color as long as it's pearl gray in the early days, right? It has evolved, quite a bit, right, since then. What Mike knows that I'm deeply interested in smart environments, right? Because I think that we're on the cusp of, moving from, oh, you poor person, you have to have a device, all right, versus those who are well off enough to be living in a smart environment that is responsive to you. So, Tim, I would talk about this is, what is the value of the Z-axis? Whether you're wearing a device or you're in physical space, right? As we move from just X, Y, what is the added value of dimensionality, right? Of moving into
3D. For your exact example, or the metaphor, I should say, that fits in this, is going from um, uh, word. What was the original word processing? Um,
Wang? No, it wasn't Wang.
well, Wang was the machine,
It
but
was
the
a
first
machine.
word.
Ah,
My brain. Anyway, my point is
Word Perfect? No. Is it Word Perfect?
one of them, but the whole my point was the value just in in this particular concept would have been going from uh, WordPress or Word Pro to PageMaker,
Mm.
Hmm.
right? Because that gave us the going from I won't call it 2D 3D, but that shifted the value proposition because now you could manage every pixel.
Right.
Right.
Which then begat PostScript, right?
Exactly. That's
And
the
then every
PostScript started.
newsletter I worked and wrote on had 27 fonts, and we used them all. Uh,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the point. Is that if you did a just that early stage, what was the first big bump in personal computing it was just from managing, particular, in this case, is ASCII fonts
right.
initially,
Yeah.
and then shifting into a very rich environment using Aldous PageMaker and everything else that was there.
Yeah. To reach back to the previous era, pre-digital, is Heidi, all right, used to be able to operate a Mercanthaler, right, typesetter, right, which had optical lenses that had the typefaces on them. You had
Yeah.
to reach into the machine and pull the disc out and put another one. You had to do it by touch because it was, there was no lighting inside the thing. Um, Very male dominated industry that
Yep.
she cracked, right? And she could do what was called strip shot copy through. She could walk through all the departments and do a rush job because she knew how to do every function, all right, at that newspaper. In any event, it was that was all before, but that was a big improvement because you couldn't change the fonts, right, before the Mercanthaler was
Correct.
introduced, right? So it was kind of like, oh, this is high tech.
While we're on that subject
Yeah,
of 50 years of computing,
sure.
yesterday was the birthday of the Mac, 40th
Yep.
anniversary of the Mac.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I will point you to my column in Forbes yesterday, where I wrote I listed the 6 major things that Apple did through the Mac that changed computing, starting with Google, the graphical
Oui.
interface, uh, just the whole list. I'd encourage you and our listeners to at least check that out because it was really good. And then secondly, if you can find this, and for us who've been here a long time, Mike, you will enjoy this. Last night at the Computer History Museum, they had a series of panels with key players who birthed the Mac.
Hmm.
Everything from Bill Atkinson and Horowitz and those guys to and the gal who actually wrote all the fonts. It was
Sue?
really amazing. Anyway, it's on YouTube now, and if you go to YouTube and look for CHM for Mac's 40th anniversary, you can watch it. But it was incredible for as one who was involved with a lot of that. Man, I was all these people that I've known for 40 years popped up, and they were as a part of it. So they did three. They did one session on with the 5 major players who were involved.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second panel was on how you marketed it and the success in marketing. And then the third panel was its impact. What was the impact of the Mac? And David Pogue and Stephen Levy from he wrote for Rolling Stones at the time.
Yep.
But there were all these major players who influenced it, and they're still around, you know.
Yeah,
Like, was
exactly
Susan
right.
there? Susan Kerr
Oh, of course, she was the one who was she was the only woman. No,
That's right.
Andy Cunningham
And Andy,
was
right.
on the marketing one because she was the one who was she was the PR agency that marketed the
Was it,
map.
was Allison there too? Allison Thomas, I think was,
He was in the
well,
audience.
but then, right. Cause it was, what's his name's PR firm was there from the beginning. Regis McKenna,
Oh,
who I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
he
But
passed away a while ago, but
Since Regis is around, I'm surprised
he
he
is.
wasn't
Oh,
invited. Yeah, he's ill. He's in his late 80s at least, I think.
well,
Yeah.
you know my story, right? That Kevin's heard a million times. That was my first tech story as a writer, reporter, was when I was at the Fremont Argus, right? And the business guy got an invite from this company, Apple in Cupertino, to show up some afternoon on a Thursday, or I don't remember what it was. And the business writer at the time, who shall remain nameless, is still around, and said, yeah, I got something else to do. And, I'm not that into computers. And the CD editor looked at me and said, "You're going." And I was like, "Well, sure. What am I covering?" "Well, it's this Apple, this company down in Cupertino. They got another new computer." And I was like, "Oh, well, what about?" And I said, "What about the business guy who covers this stuff?" He's like, "Yeah, he doesn't want to go." And and by the way, you know how to make the acoustic coupler modem on the Radio Shack TRS 100 work more than most people. So why don't you go down? And I walk into the room, and it was Evelyn from the Mercury, Markov, who I think was at InfoWorld or something back then, or Info Week. And I don't know, they hadn't brought analysts like you. It was just
Oh, no,
press.
no, no, I was
I
there.
mean, I think but I don't know if you were in that meeting. Maybe you were, because Jobs was still wearing the dress shirt and bow tie, with the
Oh, yeah,
sleeves
you mean
rolled up to the elbow.
after the event?
This was a pre-brief. This
Oh, the
wasn't the
preview. Oh,
actual
yeah, yeah,
launch.
yeah,
This was actually on the campus. And I walked in, and he said, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, "Who the hell are you?" I said, "I'm Mike McGuire with the Fremont Argus." He's like, "Oh, I'm Steve." And then Scully walked in. I remember he was wearing a windbreaker or something. And Steve and I chatted. He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Santa Cruz." He said, "Oh, rah, 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 rah." He said, "I think you'll like this." And that's when he brought the bag in and then pulled it
There you
out.
go. There you
That was
go.
my first story. I didn't keep the article because I didn't feel like I knew enough, and I barely covered it correctly. I didn't have to write any corrections, but that was my first, and I had to spend an afternoon going, CPU processor, okay. And then I showed the stuff, we got the handouts from them, right? And I went to our technical guy who was keeping all of our newspaper terminals running. And I said, "What do you know about this thing, the graphical user interface?" He said, "Show me a picture." And they gave me the materials. He's like, "Oh, oh, well," and he tried to explain it. It was terrible. It was a terrible story, but I got the basic information out there. But that was my first ever tech story I had to write.
So running in parallel with less visibility, all right, because I just ran this call 2 weeks ago with Vint Cerf, was this is also the year that the internet was
Yeah.
invented, right? And so because the Apple brought a commercial product and it was being pushed, the internet kind of seeps out, right? It just kind of becomes this thing. It actually doesn't actually emerge out of government and university lore until Tim Berners-Lee gives us the World Wide Web, right?
right.
There's a step function change at that point that's very similar to what we've been experiencing with generative AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
That comes out of the shadows and it's kind of like, oh, I have to do this. So I think it's really interesting how fertile this period of time was, right?
Oh, amazing.
It was just incredible, right? What was going on.
Yeah. I gotta log off here. I got another call coming, but
Thanks, Tim.
good seeing all you guys.
All
Thank you,
right.
Tim.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Alka, you're on mute, but we want to recognize that you are with us for the last few minutes. How are you today?
I'm fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Yep.
You're out in Mike's territory, and he's over in Redwood City.
Oh, you're in Redwood City, Mike?
Yeah. Where are you, Alka?
Okay. I'm in
Are
Mountain
you,
View.
if you want to disclose, it's okay. If
Oh,
you're in a secure,
is it
if you're in
being
a secure
recorded?
location.
Oh, sorry. This is being recorded, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to redact that. from anything else.
She's in Santa Cruz, everybody.
Yeah.
Random coast side.
Yeah. Well, it's a simple search somebody can look up. So, but
Very good.
what do you? Thank you for the discussion. I was part of the early the iPhone and the Mac, the period. So yeah, I appreciate the discussion, and we've been waiting for the AR technology to take off for a long time.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We certainly have. So we're
I think it got inhibited for a while when people started to needed to put VR into the same construct. I thought we were leaving that behind when we started with AR, but I think
there's been a lot of confusion and excitement and missteps and moving on, but they are, like when you step back, whatever comes out of it, that they had their roles to play.
Right.
And I know that once people started getting, sick on VR machines and all that, that had a issue. Network wasn't ready, content wasn't great. So there's been, a lot of things, but AR, I felt from, obviously we sometimes bet on a technology and doesn't take off.
Sure.
But I thought AR had a business use and potential that
Mike and I absolutely agree with you on that, is that, taking yourself out of the game by going into a virtual world versus the both and of AR is very compelling. I'm a big fan of AR. It hasn't hit its stride yet, but I feel good about what it's going to be.
I see it as very similar to what we kind of this industry and a company I worked at, Grid, with the first tablets that were out there. Everybody wanted to replace their, nice, vellum lined, paper notebooks. And, let's do handwriting recognition. And the real value was things like, being able to replicate a form that allowed, the tree trimming companies in Detroit to more quickly process invoices. Right. And that saved them a ton of money, but it wasn't color. It wasn't, doing, freehand writing recognition. It replaced paper forms. It was faster.
You're absolutely right, Mike. And that's what killed the tablet form factor over and over again, was people's expectations that it had handwriting recognition. And it turns out that voice recognition is much easier than handwriting recognition. All right.
Right.
So, we got there first talking to the machine, and ultimately, what caused it to take off was exactly what Nicholas Negroponte at MIT Media Lab said, which is the best pointing device we have is this,
Yes.
not a stylus. Okay. This, your finger. Right. And when we have a machine that you can use your finger to point with, right, as navigation device, it'll take off. And he was right, and Apple did it first. So, I mean, the rest of the form factor, after failing, took off because of being able to point with your finger. In any event, we're at the end of our time. Alka, it was great having you with us briefly. Look forward to having you on future episodes. And Mike, as always, vibrant discussion today. It went, 40 degrees in a slightly different direction halfway through.
Sorry about that.
That's what these calls are for. It was a twofer. Everyone, thanks for joining, and everything you do, be intentional. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.